as the owner of the exclusive right to use those works, can decide whether to enforce or not without affecting the rights you have in your work and your copyrights. Gotcha. With trademarks, it's not like that. If somebody's infringing, you gotta stop them, because the longer you let them go unpoliced, the better argument they get to build, and the better argument subsequent infringers or people using similar brands, the better their argument gets. Okay.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Again, my name is Kevin from Music with Flavor, where we help you taste success within the music industry. Again, joined by a friend of mine. You may have seen our chat before on copyright, and we're about to dive further into that topic and some other areas. Again, that is attorney Roger Notario of Apollo's Counsel. So I'd like to give you a warm welcome today. How are we doing?
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me on again, man. Really enjoyed that last time we did this, so I'm really glad we're doing this again.
Yeah, no, me as well. I think we scraped the surface before. I know we're itching to kind of dive into a lot more other topics, so I'm excited to jump into that. And I think today we're going to venture down the path of trademarks, kind of still tying into copyright, but more on the other side of that, and how to protect ourselves as artists, because it is a bit of a different world from the conversations that we've been having, and even some stuff that's happened recently within music and entertainment. So I guess to get the ball rolling, as artists out there, when it comes to trademarking your name, I'm an artist starting out, and I'm thinking, I got this little whatever, as a new rap name coming out. Is my first inclination probably isn't to register the trademark for that. But what, what would you think artists, or what would you suggest to artists when it comes to that, and thoughts that they should have when getting up and going with their name and trademark, I guess?
The most important thing a brand owner can do, artists and small businesses alike, really any brand owner, the most important thing you can do for yourself and your brand is conduct a thorough clearance search before using a mark. Okay? What that means is look through the internet, look through the USPTO's database, look through any state database you can get into, literally anywhere. Search high and low to see if anybody else is using a similar brand to which you want to develop. Okay?
Right.
Because you could come up with the best name that somebody else is already using. And in that case, it's useless. It's useless to you. Somebody else is already developing it. Even if you start using it and nobody cares or nobody notices at the beginning, if you make enough noise, I assure you that people will notice and people will knock on your door.
Right. It's interesting, too, that you speak about making enough noise, and I think some of the audience that we have, maybe that is their thought, and it comes back to copyright, too, is that, well, I'm just small now, like, who cares? You're not really thinking with the end in mind sometimes, and maybe that plays into money. Do you suggest that, hey, like, is it something that you get that done right away, or is it worth it for that artist who maybe even in some cases isn't really taking it seriously enough to go out there and really trademark their name or things like that? What would you say in that regard,
Okay, so, I mean, when starting up any business, the goal is to survive. Right? And then make money as time goes by.
Right.
So, I mean, naturally, I would never advise anybody overspend, go over budget for anything, because any amount that you go over budget, it could ruin your business. Right. So I never tell people like, register your things at all costs, right? Because all costs could mean going into debt you can't afford.
Right.
Obviously, that's not a good idea.
Right.
But you do everything you can. I mean, you can do a Google search yourself, and I don't mean like do one search for the exact name that you want and the exact spelling. Do your best to like search every variation, no matter how remote it may seem, because it will matter. Just because you have a Z instead of an S, or whatever, some different looking vowel, it's not going to change the fact that if it's pronounced the same, if it looks the same, and has the same commercial impression, you'll be infringing, right? So search, and search.
Right.
And I mean, dude, I know for a fact that artists and producers nowadays have got that Google food down, and y'all will search and learn for hours, days, months on end on how to design a sound, how to perfect a cadence. Take that energy and search for your name.
Right.
Okay. It's not too complicated, but it does take patience, and it does take diligence. You have to take the time to do it.
Right.
And if you can't afford to hire a lawyer to represent you throughout the entire application registration process, at least see if you can afford to have an attorney do the clearance search for you, right? Because that's going to be cheaper than having them do the whole thing.
Right.
And it'll be a much more thorough search than just plugging into Google and seeing what comes up.
Right.
Because I can't tell you the amount of times that I've had people like, yeah, no, I searched and nobody's using it. And then I did a search real quick and I found a bunch of people using it, and the only difference is the way they spelled it. And I'm like, dude, that's it's inconsequential. That doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Okay. I can if I try to spell Nike with an extra E, nobody's gonna care. Like Nike's not gonna care. They're still gonna be like, no, can't do that.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of that search.
Right.
And when it comes to your brand, if you're gonna pay for something, pay for that search. Like before you pay a designer, before you search for the name, search for your name.
Yeah, I think to add to that, like there's so many. We don't look at like maybe the long-term costs that come and are associated with that. I think even just looking at large companies and like what it costs them to even just rebrand and change their names and things like that. An artist that comes to mind, I know it's a bit of a different reason why she changed her name, but Mulatto, changing to Lotto, and all the branding that was driven into that to now flip
that
the
requires
script.
a whole campaign. So much money.
Exactly.
Rebranding is expensive.
Right. So, I mean, you might not always be able to get it right from the get-go. I think 2 Chainz as well. I think Titty Boy was his name from the get-go.
And he's kept the moniker.
But essentially, like, those rebrands, it's not always easy to get people to look at you in a different way or, think of that association. So definitely important to get that close to the get off the bat as possible. But you mentioned
and
a few
another
things.
go
ahead. Go ahead.
Rebrands are always going to take money and time.
Yeah.
But the longer you build the brand you have right now, that needs to be changed later, the longer you build it, the more money and more time it's going to take to let everybody know that you have a new name.
Right.
That's why it's really important to do your best to clear your branding from the start.
Right.
Because the longer you use it, the harder it is to notify everybody.
Right.
And I don't want to confuse things. Your brand is more than just your name. Right. Your brand is more than just your logo. Your brand is the goodwill that you build up with your audience, with your clientele, right? And changing the name, it doesn't change your whole brand. But when somebody changes their name, if you want to look for them, if you want to get their attention, you're going to call them out by that name. And if that's not the name you go by anymore, they're not going to find you. Right. Unless you've done the proper preparation and you have your search stuff on point, and then you have a press release and all these other things. You have to tell them. And
exactly.
It takes time. It takes money.
Yeah. With regards to doubling back about, you talked about maybe hiring a lawyer and stuff like that. I know we talked previously about copyright and the process that takes to, get your music copyrighted and protected. Is this situation with, trademarks and stuff like that, is that process a lot lengthier in terms of getting that? Yeah.
It is a lot more. It is a lot lengthier for sure.
Right. It
is also a more detailed process, they're more nitpicky.
Right.
For sure. I think this kind of paints a picture. When you submit things to the Copyright Office, and your applications to register your copyrights, and they have staff that reviews these things and sends letters back and stuff.
Right.
But when you file applications with the Trademark Office, the person that's going to review it and get back to you is an attorney. So they're going to be a lot more diligent. They're going to be a lot more scrutinizing, and they're going to look at this in a lot more detail.
Right.
So not only is it lengthier, it's more difficult to get things through
with that
you want to get through. Like, let's see, copyright application, you're going to send it in, and anywhere from 2 to 6 months, give or take, right? You're going to hear back and say you got a registration or you don't.
Right.
And then if they deny it, you can appeal it, and that's pretty much it. With the Trademark Office, you apply, they review. If they have an issue, they're going to tell you need to address it. If you can't address it, they're going to kill your application. If you do address it, it's not over, because it keeps going to another stage in the process where everybody gets to see what you're doing and can come in and be like, nah, he can't do that. That's like my name or whatever. It is so much lengthier, so much more detailed, so much more goes into it.
Right.
And it can take, the fastest turnaround I've had, from filing application to getting the notice in my email that the mark was registered.
Right.
Fastest turnaround I've had is like 8 months.
Oh, really? Wow.
8 months is kind of like as fast as it's going to get.
Yeah.
Because, you submit it. Normally they're going to take about 3 months to get back to you. It could be less. They're super swamped lately, I think, and it could be longer. I got applications that I put in November, and I only just last week got the first letter from the office, from the Trademark Office. Right. So it takes time. Right. It takes time.
Again, so not waiting to the last minute on these things to be trying to get them through the door.
No, you need to develop things with these things with patience.
Right.
When you're developing your brand, it's not only going to take time to build it, but it's going to take time to create and register all of the materials.
Right.
The component parts of the brand.
Right.
So you want to take your time. And usually, if you haven't started using the name, and you do a search, or you go to an attorney and ask them to do the search, and they come back to you and they're like, this is a completely unique name and nobody else has it. Right. This is awesome. Rare that doesn't really happen too often, but if you get that, cool. You can run with this, start using it, and apply, and that timeline won't affect you as much unless the search didn't come back right. Right? Attorneys have duties. Attorneys, have to provide a certain amount of due diligence.
Right.
But we're human. We're human,
Exactly.
and we miss things. And again, it's a human on the other side. They're going to think of things that you hadn't, so they might find things that the attorney didn't find on the search.
Right.
You know. So if that happens and comes up later, it can cause an issue if you started building the brand. Okay. So I say ideally, don't use a brand until you know you're gonna be able to secure it.
Right.
Obviously, that's not a timeline that's feasible for everybody.
Right.
And I think we touched on this the last time. I mean, we're talking in ideals right now.
Right.
Ideally, this is how things would work.
Right. And I mean, with regards to all of this with relation to copyright, trademarks, it gets pretty interesting with like cases and, you know, different fine lines of, you know, because you mentioned Nike and adding an E to it. But then like I see certain scenarios where what's the thing from Coming to America?
McDonald's.
Yeah, exactly.
That was great. They knew what they were doing there.
Yeah. Like certain things seem to coexist, if you know what I mean, while others it's like, no, you cannot do that. So does that kind of stem from maybe location-wise, internationally, geographically, as to how that has implications, or is it more so the person, the owner, the entity being like, okay, maybe I don't really care about that, and that's not something worth pursuing, maybe, or is there more deeper meaning to that?
So, okay, I'm gonna try to keep track of what I want to say right here.
Yeah.
But the first thing I want to say that's really important is that when it comes to trademarks, you cannot just selectively enforce your rights. Okay. I don't like trademark law doesn't care that it's not worth your time, it's not worth your money, and they don't care that it's a small operation that's infringing or that they're probably going to shut down, and they don't care. The law on trademarks doesn't care, and it's very clear. You need to enforce your rights if you want to keep them. Because if you don't police your trademarks, over time, your mark gets diluted and the strength of your brand and your ability to protect it in the future gets diluted, is diminished.
Right.
And so you can be selective. Like with copyright, if somebody's infringing your work, but you think it's funny or you like it, you support it, whatever it may be, right? You as the owner of that copyright, as the owner of the exclusive right to use those works, can decide whether to enforce or not without affecting the rights you have in your work, in your copyrights. Gotcha. With trademarks, it's not like that. If somebody's infringing, you gotta stop them, because the longer you let them go unpoliced, the better argument they get to build, and the better argument subsequent infringers or people using similar brands, the better their argument gets. Okay, so there's no selective enforcement in trademarks. That cuts against the brand owner. Right. That's the first thing. It's really important to note. Let's see. The second thing I wanted to touch, the McDonald's example, hilarious. It's a little different, okay? Because unlike a copyright where you use it in another work, right? When it comes to branding, trademarks, you have to use them in commerce. Right. Okay. In commerce, meaning you put products out or services for the public to consume. Right. That you that you associate with this brand. Right. Okay. That's use. When you do something like what they did in Coming to America with McDowell's, that's not a use, right? Like the universe of Coming to America is not a real place. It does not have real businesses. It does not have real consumers. Right. So it's not a use. Gotcha. That is more. That's a creative thing. That's like a. That's. I know what you're saying. I I don't like to say it because people tend to run with this phrase, but it's a fair use, right? In the real world, you could not open a McDowell's.
Right. Right.
You can't.
Right. Which makes
Right?
sense. Yeah.
But in this movie, this creative work that's supposed to be comical,
Right.
It's that is a satirical use.
Gotcha.
To put it one way.
Right.
So that's why that's allowed to happen. Because it's not a use, you're doing something creative with the idea of it. You're not using it in commerce.
Right.
That's how that happens. And then, let me see, what was the other part? You got to, there was a third thing that you kind of came in. So you talked about internationally.
Yeah. So like based on protections, I guess, based on if maybe I'm in Canada, this thing isn't, as a rapper or something or an artist, that person is more so based in the States or Europe or something. I have the same name, but I'm in Canada, or do you know what I mean? How that kind of plays out, and if that gives maybe some protection, I guess, or is that something where it depends on the level of the artist and how big the brand is, probably as well too, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah. So let's see, how can I put this? Just because you're in Canada does not mean that you won't expand into other territories, right?
Right.
I mean, everybody has a different goal, but generally speaking, in music, the goal is to reach as large an audience as possible.
Right. Right.
And unlike being a lawyer or certain other things that require geographical licenses and limits you to certain areas, or a restaurant where if you don't have a restaurant there, you can't serve people there. Right. Music can be and is sold internationally. Right. And so you ideally want to build audiences internationally. Right. So if you're a Canadian artist and you see that there is one other person that's using the name you want to use in whatever, China, France, whatever. Yeah. Pick a country. And you see that, don't think to yourself, all right, cool, that's fine. It's not going to be a problem. It's just France. Yeah. Because it might not be a problem right now, given the level you and the other artists are at. But one of you is going to want to blow up. One of you is going to want to expand. Right. And as soon as one of you does expand into the other's territory, issues will arise. Right. Right. And that's without getting into the international treaties that these countries have between each other, where you don't even necessarily have to file things to have rights in them. Right. Certain uses get transferred automatically as a sort of this is yours to capture, which is why there are things like the international trademark systems, and you can do international trademark searches, right, and all of that. So don't think that because this person's super far out there that it's not going to be a problem, because if you do things right, if one of you does things right to its fullest potential, eventually you will be at each other's doors. Right. And that's going to be a problem.
Yeah. I definitely think that's interesting with, I see it a lot too with people on distribution platforms. You're trying to get your music on Spotify, and then all of a sudden some other random artist pops up with, you're a rapper, this person has, maybe their rock music, and that's on your, space there. So it's interesting that these things happen. Same names, similar names, and even sometimes those platforms can't get it right. So how annoying.
It's not the platform's fault that you guys have the same name.
Right, exactly, right? So, and how are they to know you didn't decide to just put out a rock album at this point in time? So it is a small world, and these things are going to get used. So I think trying to protect yourself, especially like you're saying, if you're aspiring to get to that height, it makes sense to start going that route for sure.
No, you make a great point. Yeah. I think I even approached that with an antiquated mentality. I was thinking about actually being in front of each other. Right. Yeah. Global streaming, You, as soon as you put your music out through DistroKid,
Right.
you already are at each other's doors. So
Exactly.
yeah. No, you don't want to. I mean, it's happened to me before. Like, I think it's like Mike Jones.
Okay.
There's apparently a jazz artist called Mike Jones.
Okay.
And I got suggested it, and I was like, wait, what? Mike Jones has a new track. Cool. And I was like, wait, that's not Mike Jones.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a great example in that if your name is Mike Jones, your name is Mike Jones.
Right.
You can't stop other people from using their birth names. But if Mike Jones had been, some other kind of less common name,
Right.
that would be an issue.
Exactly. Right.
It would be an issue.
Right.
So.
Right. No, it's definitely. I think there's a lot of different little elements that kind of come into play here, and I think it's just if you can, like you're saying, I guess it's not a matter of an ultimatum, go do it, but if you are able to protect yourself, and this is something that is your brand that you're going to put a lot of money behind. Like you said, it's a business. It makes sense to protect it. So.
100%.
With
100%.
regards to examples, I guess we kind of talked about the naming convention. I know, like, I saw an interview with, I think it was that Joe Budden podcast when they had Steve Stout on, and he talked about some of these issues with bigger companies, and it's almost like a marketing thing to have some of these infringements happen. Like, the ones that comes to mind is the Little Nas X one, the Nike shoes, and how they could have put a stop to that maybe, or it kind of seemed convenient that it comes out and then it's this huge hoopla and then, hey, no, now we don't like that kind of thing. What's your kind of stance on those situations and how it kind of dives into clout and stuff like that too?
So, I mean, I'm not sure that the whole Nike thing really falls into your question, even because we don't know if what Mischief did was an infringement.
Right.
We don't know because they ended up settling, which made me really sad because I was really looking forward
to learning more about
to that case law. I really wanted to hear a court speak on it because the secondhand custom market is huge right now. It's huge. Right. This is not new. This is not new at all.
Right.
And it's not just with shoes. It happens with hats. It happens with all kinds of merch.
Right.
And these things go on unquestioned.
Right.
And I believe, and this is just my opinion given what I know and what I see, I don't think that what they did was an infringement.
Okay.
I think it was very clearly a, secondhand custom.
Right.
They very clearly took one thing, made it new.
Gotcha.
Without, I mean, like, everybody's different. Everybody interprets things differently, and this is why juries exist and why, courts exist and whatnot. But I don't think looking at any of the materials, I never at any point thought that Nike was behind it. Right. I didn't. Right. And the target audience for these products know this.
Right.
They know. Like, they know when it's, just an aftermarket, custom, and when it's a, like, full-blown Nike collaboration. Right. Like, there's no question that the J. Cole Pumas were a Puma collaboration. Right. I don't think there's any question behind that. And the marketing looked completely different.
Right. Exactly.
These two. So and again, the target market for these products know this, different. And that's important, right? The consumer it's important who the target consumer is,
right?
Because the average person is not going to buy these shoes.
That's
They're
true.
Not. So the I think the best argument and claim that Nike had against Mischief was the tarnishment argument. It was a tarnishment claim because there were a lot of people that, because they thought that it was a collaboration, that Nike was endorsing it.
Right.
And this whole, religion is a landmine.
Yes.
For brands, right? If a brand is going to say anything about religion, they've thought about it. They're taking a hard stance
On it, yeah.
That's why most brands don't.
Exactly.
That's why most brands don't. And so, I think what's crazy to me is like, part of what I think was working against Nike and why I was so excited to see this go forward was the fact that this wasn't the first time, right? Obviously, we're aware of the Jesus shoe because it came up a lot when this whole issue came up. The Jesus shoe was never objected to by Nike. And chances are it's because it didn't get as much publicity. Despite the fact that it did get negative feedback from not consumers, but people that don't understand and think that Nike was doing some blasphemous thing, putting Jesus or a cross on a pair of Nikes. Right. But they didn't say anything. Exactly. They didn't try to stop that. That's just one example. This happens all the time nowadays. Yeah, all the time. And how many other people has Nike tried to stop that we know of? Right. That we know of. But they probably haven't because they know that there's not really anything there. Right. Like, I mean, dude, if you can't resell modified products, then like the entire freaking like aftermarket for race cars and modded Civics would not exist. Right? Yeah. Like nobody could ever sell their, giant spoiler having, huge exhaust Civic. Nobody could do it. But they can't. Why? Because this is my product. I bought this. Like this is an item that I bought. I have the right to resell it. Right. And if I made changes to it, I made changes to it. Right. Okay. I'm not saying that it came like this from factory. Right. Right. So, I mean, there's also it's complicated, the whole Nike thing with Mischief, because there's also something called like the material alteration doctrine, which also was in their favor. I guess at the end of the day, despite the fact that I was on Mischief's side with this, I do think they could have been a little clearer in terms with their disclaimers, right? Making it very, very abundantly clear that this was not a legitimate collaboration. It was just an aftermarket product. Right. So if we can learn anything from Mischief, just because you think something is obvious doesn't mean you shouldn't tell people. Right. This is educational right here. I'm not giving legal advice. I'm still going to tell you this is not legal advice. Right. I don't care how obvious it may seem. Right. I'm going to tell you. Right. Just in case. Right. And that's one thing that's like really important, I would say, when you're not so much developing a brand. I mean, yes, it applies to developing a brand, but more generally, when you're growing a business, right, there are going to be things that you should do, even if you think it's like this obvious thing. Tell people, make the disclaimers obvious, right, and things like that. Just because you never know who isn't really paying attention, right, and what they're going to get from it. So, it might seem obvious to you, it might seem obvious to your fan base or your clientele, right, but that's not everybody. Exactly. And your marketing is going to reach more people than that, and so you should be, very careful and don't shy away from, putting those disclaimers and notices, right, even if you don't think that your audience, right, needs to hear it, because it's not for them, and you don't tell people things, when they know it, you tell them to make sure they know. Right. So. No, that makes sense. I feel like maybe this is just me, and I know we've kind of gone down our conspiracy lanes before. I feel
I don't know anything, right? And like that's interesting. I didn't even think about how it got settled. So you don't even get to really know the nitty gritty of it.
Man.
Yeah,
It was so quick too. I mean, what a roller coaster.
right. So
Good Lord.
I mean, I see some of these things that if it wasn't the age of social media, how people leverage their brands in that regard, or the brands of others as well. I don't know if that's maybe Reebok or some other company. Does that really have the same impact? I don't know. And I could just be talking out my ass here too. But I think a big name like Nike, obviously, I think that maybe adds to it just a little bit more to be like, okay, you know, now they're making a statement. Now it's this big thing, and the trickle down effect. At the end of the day, to me, Nas X is laughing because it's just extended more and more and more, right? It's just become this big thing, good or bad, right? So,
Yeah. Not even argue, but I think clearly Lil Nas got the best of it, right?
right,
Like he
right.
came out the best with that
Exactly.
whole situation
Right.
because he got the publicity, he got his money from the collaboration,
Right,
and Nike didn't sue him. Go figure. Nike didn't sue him,
right,
and I'm pretty sure they didn't sue him because they didn't want that. They didn't want the optics,
right,
right? They didn't want that PR because at this point, big brands know that you don't fuck with the talent.
right, right, right.
You know, you don't bring them down.
Right, exactly.
You don't bring them down.
Right.
It happened with what, Cristal or Dom, right?
One of them, yeah, I think so. One
With
of
Dom
them, yeah.
Perignon, we're like, nah, we don't like these rappers using our fans, and they're like, all right, fuck you. We're
I think
gonna
that's
build
Cristal.
up this other brand. Cristal.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I see what you're saying for sure.
I think that's what happened there.
To touch on, I think we kind of touched on this just a while ago, but it just came to my mind, like Little Nas X, the infamous Illmatic Nas, not to be confused.
Yeah.
What do you say in that regard from a name standpoint?
Well, I thought it was interesting at first when Lil Nas X first came out.
Uh-huh.
I was like, really?
Right.
You're not gonna say anything, Nas?
He's even endorsed them too, which not that that's a
He
bad
has?
thing or anything. I think he's said that he respects it, like he's all good.
I mean, I don't think anybody can honestly not.
Yeah,
You know, like, look, man, everybody has their tastes. Everybody's entitled to their own taste. That's fine.
Right.
You don't have to like everything.
right,
But there are certain things that you cannot deny the quality and impact of.
Right.
And I think Lil Nas X is one of those.
100%.
Like, even if he had done nothing else, even if he was a one-hit wonder
Yeah,
with Old Town, it doesn't matter,
right,
right?
Exactly.
You cannot deny the impact of that.
right. And I was just going off structurally just the name too of just like how that. But
No, yeah. Sorry to
no.
digress, but
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting too. I was surprised, but I think at the end of the day, we know that Nas is Nas, right?
Right,
And Lil Nas X was such a, yeah, it said Nas in it, but you're like Lil X, and you're like, okay, this is very clearly not the same person,
right.
And that's where what are these phrases? Well, that's where the butter's made, or whatever.
Right.
That's the crux of it.
Okay.
Okay. It was obvious,
Right,
right? The consumers of these products were going to know,
right,
and that's really important. When you're comparing two marks, you know, is it obvious? Like, yes, like I told you, one letter different isn't going to make that won't necessarily make a big difference, right? If it's going to all come out, if you're changing letters, but it's going to sound the same,
right,
that doesn't matter.
right,
But in the case of Lil Nas X, the only thing they have in common is Nas,
exactly,
right?
Right.
That Lil and the X on the other side, they do a lot to change the commercial impression
Of it,
of the mark,
right,
which is probably why nobody made a fuss. And even if they made a fuss, it probably would have been
nothing that you can.
swept under the rug. It wouldn't have been a big deal,
Right.
Because it matters, right? Will people be confused? That is the That is the core of trademark law.
Okay.
Will consumers be confused? That's like, if you want to sum up all of trademark law into one statement,
Right.
that is it. Will consumers be confused? Yes, we shouldn't allow that.
Right.
And so I don't think anybody was confused about the relationship between Nas and Lil Nas X.
Right.
But that is a good question. I thought of it. I thought of it too, but that's probably what happened. They didn't care.
Yeah.
That didn't seem like a big deal. Nobody was confused, and that was it. There's also something to consider where Nas is obviously a huge artist, right?
Right.
Like, there's no denying the importance of Nas to hip hop,
Right. Right.
and to music. But outside of that, right? Unless you are a fan of the genre, you don't know. You don't.
Right.
Which is different from what would be considered a famous brand like McDonald's.
Right.
I don't care what you like. I don't care if you're a vegetarian, vegan. I don't care if you live under a rock. You know what McDonald's is.
Right. Right.
And when a brand is that culturally pervasive, they get extra protections. So if Nas was at the level of like McDonald's, where everybody everywhere knows about him,
Right.
he might have been able to stop Lil Nas X. He probably would have really good grounds to do so.
Right.
But that wasn't the case. But that's why you probably can't start a hardware store right now called McDonald's.
Right. Exactly.
It doesn't matter that obviously burger people don't sell hammers and lumber.
Right.
It doesn't matter. The brand is so big
Right.
that anywhere you put that name, people are going to make that association.
Right.
Anywhere.
Right. Is it true that there's like classifications based on, so like you mentioned, like in certain cases, if my name is, I know we're using McDonald's in this, but, and I sell hardware and, someone down the street is also McDonald's, but they are selling something totally different. Is there like grounds for that to coexist when you're not talking about a McDonald's at that level?
Yes, in fact, let's just not even use the name McDonald's in this context. Literally any other name would probably do. But
Yeah, I know.
No, yes, that is true.
Right.
So trademark rights are based on use.
Right.
Okay. Unlike copyright, if I right now record a song, I don't put it out, I have rights to that work.
Right.
I own that copyright, no matter what. I don't have to sell it. I don't have to do anything with it. I made it. I own it.
Right.
Trademarks is different. You can come up with a great name. You can come up with the perfect logo.
Right.
But until you use it, you have zero rights in it.
Gotcha.
So let's say, in March, you were planning your new business. You came up with the perfect name, the perfect logo. It's just like every time you see it, you cry a little bit.
Yeah.
You don't start using it until May. If somebody used the name and the brand and the mark, like if somebody took that and used it in April,
Right.
they won. They won. I don't care. It doesn't matter that you came up with it first, right?
Gotcha.
It's about use. You have to use it to own it in trademark. So that's sort of like the first thing.
Right.
The second part of it is that, even with your use, your rights to the name, to the brand, to the mark, only extend as far as your industry. What you use that mark in connection with.
Right.
Right? So, as you said, if I sell Apollo's hardware, right? If I sell hardware under the name Apollo's, that's hardware.
Right.
I have no right to stop a boat chartering company from calling themselves Apollo.
Right.
Right? but then those are two very different things. The line blurs when it's a little closer, and it's actually, just because. Okay, let's see. I don't want to say hardware because I don't know what I would even put that's similar to it. But let's let's just stay within our industry.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm a production company under the name Apollo's. Again, the hardware store, I can't stop them. But if there's a video company, right? A video production company that tries to use the name, I will most likely be able to, and definitely should try to stop them from using the name, because the industries are so related. Right? And chances are they're going to be in the same class.
Gotcha.
In fact, they are. If music production services and video production services are both classified under International Class 041.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, it doesn't have to be the exact same product, but they have to be sufficiently similar for you to be able to prevent people from using that same name.
Right.
If it's completely different, you can't do anything. And to be honest, you shouldn't. Why should you care? Why do you care that this guy's selling hardware under your, music name? Nobody's gonna think of anything. Nobody's gonna think anything. Nobody's gonna associate it. Nothing. Right. So it doesn't matter. Let's see. Does that answer your question?
And I think, I love the statement you made about, will this, people think that, what was the term that you said? It's different, or will this confuse people, essentially?
Will this confuse people? Will consumers be confused?
Right. And I think that, it seems so confusing, but when you narrow it down to that, and even in that statement of these similar, there is a video production or another production company, there could be confusion there for sure as well. So that makes a lot of sense to me, in just trying to narrowing it down of what, what you can't do, and where you may have a case kind of thing when it comes to that. So, yeah.
So, I guess just to circle back, yes, it is true that there are classifications involved here. So, specifically, they're called international classes. Okay, and when anybody goes to the USPTO website and tries to register their mark, you will have to choose. You will have to select classes and descriptions. It's not just the class, because the class is the number, and there's a lot of different things under it. But you have to choose a class and a specific description. So you can't just be 041. No, you have to put, video production services or whatever it may be. And then with the application, or later on, depending on what kind of application you file, you will have to provide proof that you've used it, before they grant you the registration. And if the services or products that you have attached to your application are in different classes, you need to provide proof of use for both. For both of those classes. So the classification thing is very important. It defines the limits of your brand, in a sense, and is also where you'll need to prove your use. Within what space.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think obviously it helps having a lawyer if you're obviously going down that road to make sure you're filing that correctly. One other thing when it comes to this, and I'm just thinking of merchandise now, if we kind of venture over into that world, I think of Metallica, the Ramones, some of the more popular T-shirts out there. And I also think of situations where artists used, some, I've seen Pulp Fiction used as a different kind of slogan used for the artist to kind of go with their music and branding. What do you say to that in terms of, obviously it's a moneymaker for artists, but the original, can I just go print out 1,000 Metallica shirts, obviously without a license? No. And then maybe to the point of, trying to make my own variation. So it kind of resembles that, but it's also my own thing. Is that still kind of encroaching on someone's trademark, if that makes sense?
Okay, so when speaking of merchandise,
Yeah.
really it kind of breaks down into two kinds of products, right? The ones that are like your cliche, like your Lacoste shirt that has the little gator, right? That's like one end of the spectrum. And then there's the other end of the spectrum that's like Ed Hardy, that has like full-blown, like very detailed
Things,
designs.
Right.
Okay. On the more of the Lacoste side of the spectrum, that's where trademarks are going to have the most say or impact.
Gotcha.
On whether it's an infringement or not, because since there's nothing else there,
right?
Okay, are these logos the same, and are they, indicative of the source of the product, and are people going to be confused?
Gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha.
So Lacoste has the little gator right here, and that little gator here. Traditionally, when a brand puts their logo here, that's usually how they denote. Like when they're here or here, pretty much it's like, oh, okay, that's a brand shirt or whatever company shirt.
Right.
But just because Lacoste has, the right to use the little gator here or on their tags or whatever it may be, that does not mean that you cannot design a T-shirt with a gator on it.
Right.
Right? You can like design a shirt with a big ass gator right here, whatever. Fine. Right. I wouldn't recommend that you design a shirt that has a little tiny gator right here.
Right.
Because that's going to lead to trademark infringement.
Right.
That is trademark infringement. On the other spectrum, though, that's more of a copyrights thing, because we're talking about creative designs.
Right.
So, let me see. I don't want to have an issue with digressing. I just get caught up in tangents. But there's a sort of like it's not a completely clear line between what constitutes, a logo and what is, decoratively speaking, a design. Apart from how you use it, the actual thing, the actual design itself. Like my logo right here, I have the trademark registered with the United States Trademark Office, but I can't register the copyright. This is not entitled to copyright protection because it's such a simple design.
Gotcha.
Right? The Nike logo is not entitled to copyright protection. Okay?
Right.
Most logos of a simplistic nature are not going to be entitled to to copyright protection.
Right.
Now, when you get to more elaborate logo designs, and when that logo starts looking more like a painting or a picture, right? When it starts looking more like a picture, than it does a logo, then then there may be some copyright protection involved there. Right. So, like this might not be entitled, but if I put this on like a beachfront with like all this detail, might not be a great logo. That's not going to scale very well. But I'm not a designer, and I'm not going to, say that one way or the other. But I can say that it has now become sufficiently creative of a work to probably be entitled to copyright protection. I mean, it's not a hard line. Between those two, it's not a hard line. Right. I don't know how much more you'd have to add to the Nike logo to make it eligible for copyright protection. I don't know how much you'd have to remove from more elaborate logos so that they're not entitled. It's not a clear line. But again, most logos are not going to be entitled to copyright protection. That's going to be a trademark thing. And then designs are exclusively like creative designs that are elaborate. Are going to be under the purview of copyright.
Gotcha.
So I guess now to
So it's not that
rein it
certain.
in. You try to rein that in.
Yeah.
The Metallica stuff, right?
Right.
I can't sell products under the name Metallica with one L, right? But I am free to design T-shirts with skull and crossbones or Lady Liberty or Lady Justice on it, right? Just because the cover of And Justice for All from Metallica was, Lady Justice, statue, whatever, does not mean I can't make a similar shirt. But what you can't do is take that album cover, put it on a T-shirt, and sell that. Right? You do that, assuming you take the whole thing, right? You take the whole image, it says Metallica on it, you slap it on a shirt, and you sell it. That is trademark infringement for use of the Metallica name, and it's copyright infringement for use of the album cover design. Right. So there again, the line between the two is not exactly clear cut. Right. But there are clear situations where they merge. Right. Both areas of the law are coming in. Right. The Metallica thing is one of the examples. Right. But yeah, no, I mean, you could totally do you could do a Lady Justice shirt, and that's fine. Yeah. Just don't use theirs. Exactly. And don't base it off of theirs either. Right. God damn it, this is about trademarks, but
I know.
I mean, look, just copyright infringement is not just about taking it how it is and slapping it somewhere else or on another, in another way. No. Like if you trace it, if you trace that, you've used it. That's infringing. Right. You can't do that. So, gotcha. And then, I guess to stop talking about copyrights, I mean, also never admit that certain things were influencing your work. That's how Pharrell and Rob Thicke got in trouble. Right.
That's another interesting.
So that's case, but yeah, don't go tracing things. Don't take too much inspiration from other people's stuff. Like be inspired, but generally. Right. Generally, don't be inspired to do something so similar that they're gonna know. Right. That's
and I know you're saying to kind of keep it on the trademark, but I think sometimes it does blur. Not that it does. It's it's going to be the same, but I think it's good to make those distinctions because sometimes you're thinking it is one thing when really it might be blending over to something else too. So yeah. But yeah, no, I've always been interested like that because I've seen either you get someone else to maybe draw something or essentially you just do an iteration of it. And it's like the reason why I'm drawn to that is because of the original design that I'm remembering. And you know what I mean? Like, I guess
that's why it's a problem.
Exactly, right? So, but yeah, no, that's definitely an interesting thing. Jumping over into a few other things here. With regards to ownership, trademarks, we've talked about getting them registered. A lot of times we kind of talk in the singular form, but if you have partners, things like that, I'm always interested on sometimes disputes. It's not always the best, not always a fun marriage that happens or goes on. So I like to think about situation. I've experienced it too. Being in a band or group, hip hop group, and we disbanded, and it's exactly. I ended up without pretty much nothing, but you learn from your mistakes.
Sorry to hear that, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
So sorry to hear that. Look, man, I hear these stories all the time. Yeah, and I have not become desensitized to them. Right. Like I still feel them. I'm like, damn, that sucks.
Right. Yeah, and I mean it's more so music stuff, that's all whatever it is, but platforms, you spend so much time on the marketing on a platform, things like that, and you kind of, where does that go after? So I just had questions regarding when someone maybe new joins a group, what are your thoughts on how to, what are they entitled to? Should they have ownership in that, or does it really depend on who this person is, who you're bringing in, and things to think about where that's concerned, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so again, this is something that's applicable to any small business owner, right? But artists, when you start a band, when you start a group, you are starting a business together.
Right.
Right? A three-piece band, from a business perspective, is no different than a storefront that's owned by three people.
Right.
And so you're going to want to treat it the same. And this rarely happens at the beginning. But when you start a band, you should take a moment and be like, who's in this band? Like, who's really in this band?
Right.
Right? Because, like, Green Day is a trio, and everybody who knows Green Day knows that there's a fourth guitar always in there, but he's off stage. Somewhere. Right?
Yeah.
That person's not a band member.
Right.
Right? So who's a band member? Those are your business partners.
Right.
Those are going to be your co-owners of your music business. And so what you should do when you start a band that's trying to make money, right? If you're a jam band, whatever.
Right.
Like, there's not going to be anything for you to monetize.
Right.
So it doesn't matter.
Right.
But as soon as you're trying to make money off of music as a group, you should start a company and do the paperwork to assign everybody their appropriate rights and shares in the business. And then through that, what you'll end up doing is putting the name in the company. The company will own the name.
Right.
And in that way, as it happens, band members come and go.
Right.
But the name is going to belong to the company, right? And so the most you'll be able to do after that, as a somebody that was dismembered, is be like, X of, ABC band.
Right.
Right. So let's say there was like Starship, it was an old band.
Okay.
And then there was like Jefferson Starship.
Okay.
Or you'll see a lot where old bands, or you have like dead members or whatever, they'll have like their own iteration. So like Eric Clapton's Zeppelin or something. Roger Waters Zeppelin, or Pink Floyd. Sorry, right? Like he tours as Roger Waters of Pink Floyd because that was his big job, right? That was his big band. People know him from it, and so he can be like, "Hey, I'm the guy that was from them. I'm not them, but I was from them." Right? It's like a sort of, if anything, it's like a resume, I guess.
Right.
You want to put it a certain way.
Right.
So you're letting people know that you were associated, you were from that band previously, but you are not that band. That's the most you'll be able to do.
Right.
Assuming the band agreement doesn't take that away from you.
Right.
That's literally the most you can do. And that would require, that happens more when they don't have band agreements. When they do have band agreements, they don't even do that usually.
Right.
So start a company together.
Right.
Sign a contract together for the company, saying who the name belongs to, and who owns the music and stuff. Right.
Right.
One thing that happens a lot is that a band will form, and then as bands do, they write music in jam sessions, right? So it's a collective, collaborative work that they're all gonna put into. They're all gonna push the melody one way, push things the other way, whatever. They're all gonna work together to make a song.
Right.
But for example, drummers get screwed a lot. Drummers get screwed a lot because drums in and of themselves are not protected. They're not subject to copyright protection.
Right.
In music, copyright protection is limited to lyric and melody.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not a lyric, and it's not melodic,
Right.
There's no protection.
Right.
There's no protection. So like anybody can play, like a 2/4 backbeat, just like a straight 2/4, right? Anybody can do that. There's no protection for that rhythm.
Right. I see what you're saying.
And so, as the drummer, that's what is very clearly your contribution. If you have no contractual way of capturing writer shares of the music you help create, and your band members end up wanting to screw you over, you will not have any writer's share in there.
Right.
You're not. And it happens all the time.
Right.
And the worst is when they take too long to try to do something about it, and now that there's nothing that can be done about it.
Right.
Because there's something called statute of limitations.
Mm-hmm.
Every law has one, except for murder.
Right.
And just because somebody screwed you in the past, doesn't mean you can do anything about it now. Because if you took too long, your claim's gone. And the courts are like, no, this is over. This is in the past. Get over it.
Right.
So it's sad, and I've worked with people that's happened to, and they like drummers that completely changed the sound of the group,
100%.
and were very clearly an important part of the development of their sound for that album or whatever.
Right.
No writer share.
Right.
No writer share, because they were already a band beforehand, signed to a label.
Mm-hmm.
The drummer left. They brought you in. You're not on the band agreement. Nothing is definitely giving you those writer shares.
Right.
And the label's going to give you some other contract that says you get nothing too. So you have to be very careful when you're collaborating with people musically.
100%. Yeah, I think that's just your point. Like having that drummer dynamic, not even just on the tracks, but like live performances too. It's just such a different element that can be added to your show, especially if that's something you don't. If you're just playing the backing tracks and you add a drummer in, like that's such a different element. So I think they're very valuable. But it's so true. I've had that situation too, where brought this drummer on, good friend. You're trying to do everything you can to make it work. Like, hey, you want to do? We'll put you in on the writer share to some degree, even though you're not. Actually, and then once we actually start doing yada yada yada, we can get you making stuff too. You have all these aspirations, but sometimes it just does not pan out.
It doesn't work,
and that's the tough part for sure. So having an agreement, I think, does help in certain scenarios. Even kind of, I guess, blending over to the copyright side, but it's not always going to protect everyone, especially if you don't get that done. I guess is what you're saying there, for sure. Yeah,
man. Anytime you're starting a band with somebody, anytime you're starting a group or you're starting any business with another person, start a formal business, register the company, and have a contract, okay? Because, and this is something that I think is thrown around and plenty of people understand, but not everybody, I think, fully appreciates that you are not your business. Your business has its completely, totally distinct existence. Okay. I mean, unless you're a sole proprietor, but when you're working with multiple people, it's not that simple because now you're multiple sole proprietors. So, anytime you start a business with somebody else, get it done formally. Register the business, get that contract done, because the business is its own thing. Right. Just like people have children, and those children are their own beings that will make their own decisions that you cannot control after a certain point. The business is the same way. So if you start a business with somebody else, if you want to make sure you can continue to have a say or protect your interest in it, you got to get it in writing, because it is not uncommon for the business to take a life of its own, and one of the original partners, or even a partner that came in later, to go off and run with it.
Exactly. Yeah, and my only antidote to that is essentially if you're dealing with people and it is taking a long time for them to even want to have that conversation, I know it might be your friend or whatever, but sometimes that is a red flag. I know in my experience, took multiple years just to have an actual sit down and just be like, hey, like we're trying to do something here. We're spending money on this. We're using our own money kind of thing. Money and finances are getting convoluted. Like we need to get some structure to this.
And that's when the conversation usually comes up, right?
Yeah.
When
exactly.
things are starting to get complicated.
Exactly, right?
Which is obviously going to be more complicated.
Exactly. So the earlier you can do it, the better. Sometimes it might seem premature, but it saves you some headache, to be honest. That's just from my experience. So,
I mean, there's a lot, like operating agreements and company ownership contracts can get very complicated, like any contract. I might have said this in our last session, but I'll say it again. Like, simple is better than nothing, okay? There may be a bunch of things that you are not addressing in the simple contract that you can draft up.
Right.
Just like with your hands and a piece of paper.
Right.
But it's better than nothing, okay? I would rather you have a piece of paper that says A, B, and C are starting this company. We're going to own it equally. The company owns the name. Any intellectual property we create is owned equally or owned by the company.
Right.
And the owners and managers have no liability, right? That's like 5 lines that you wrote by hand. You sign that amongst the owners. That is still better than nothing.
Right.
That's still better than nothing, right? Because there's all these things that aren't going to be addressed in that contract. Fine, they weren't being addressed anyway.
Right.
All right. At the very least, try to address the things that you know are important, right? Ownership and shares. Liability. Who holds the name? If it's important to you, write it down, come to an agreement on it. And what you're not thinking about, what's not included there, whatever, you weren't addressing it anyway. So I don't see a problem.
No, I got you. That makes sense.
You tended to be like the manager of the groups you were in, huh?
Yeah. So I mean, that's the tough part, and that's kind of what led me to doing this. And it's tough conversations that you have to have with people. It's kind of like it seems like babysitting. To some people, like, why are we even doing this? Let's just go make music. And you kind of see where things transpire to, and looking back, you're always thinking like, what could I have done better to help that situation. Sometimes you feel like you're too hard, pushing for certain things, but. At the end of the day, it's like what you're striving towards. If you're saying it needs to be this, and that's what your main goal is, like other actions have to kind of match that too. Because then to me, it becomes kind of selfish that like your priorities are superseding other people's priorities. And, we all go away from music. You have families, you have other stuff, however way you're making money or pooling money. It just ventures into other things, right? Of just respect and other things like that too. So, yes, definitely. That was.
It's a relationship.
Exactly.
Business partnership is a relationship like any other, and because bands and musicians are businesses,
right?
You need to treat it as such. You need to have those difficult conversations.
Right. 100%.
You have to have those difficult conversations. And I mean, that's not even like that's not even just a business thing. That's just life. Relationships require difficult conversations. And if you care about what you are doing together, then you need to have those difficult conversations. And if the other side's they don't want to come to the table to have that conversation, then you need to reevaluate who your partners are.
Right. 100%.
No hard feelings. It's just how it is.
Exactly.
Like, you cannot build something like that from the ground up if everybody isn't putting in their all. If you are not all on the same page, it's just not going to happen. Like a car is not going to move properly if each wheel is moving at a different rate.
Right. Different direction.
It's not going to be a good car.
Exactly. Yeah. No, 100%. And
I guess unless you're talking about like 4-wheel and traction and all that, but that's like way more nuanced. We're
Right.
talking about your standard,
Exactly.
like rear wheel, front wheel drive, whatever.
Right. And I used to think it would be like crazy how they would just randomly like stitch those bands together like back in the day, but like to me that makes more
You mean
sense.
like this like the super groups?
Yeah, or like you find like some person's talented, you guys don't even know each other, or even just collaborating in certain ways, but like to me that just makes it more business. There's not as much friend element that comes
Oh,
into
okay, you
that.
mentioned it.
Yeah.
I thought you meant like specifically. And I was never mind.
Yeah. But yeah, essentially like, if I know you for how long, yeah, and we're coming to make something, there's other emotions that, come into that, or your friends. It's hard to get beyond that, right? If you can, that's awesome. Same with family, but I'm not here to say that there's a blanket statement, don't do business with family, don't. But
Right.
there's also cliches.
But understand the risk involved.
Exactly, right? So, but no, I've always been interested in some of these topics and, what to do when it comes to bands, because it's one thing when you're by yourself and, maybe you're working with people, but having people that are pretty much equal, it does add a whole other element to things for sure. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, for this has been a great chat on this. I know we could talk for hours and hours on end, and I think we'll probably have some other topics that we can dive into at another point in time for you. But do you have any last closing words based on trademarks, suggestions
Let's
that
see.
way?
Let's see, closing remarks. Again, do not start using a brand unless you know that nobody else has it.
Right.
In your industry.
Right.
Okay? It's very important that you do that. There's no point in falling in love with a name and building it up to something and then having to tear that name apart and come up with a new one or a new logo.
Right.
Right. Like a few hours or a few $100s can save you so much headache, time, and money in the future.
Right.
So it's worth it. It really is worth it to do it right from the beginning.
Right.
Register your trademarks. It's very important to register your trademarks.
Right.
With the advent of, e-commerce and the internet literally touching everything we do.
Right.
Most businesses aren't limited to a small geographical area.
Right.
The amount of businesses that are limited to their geographical area
Right.
exclusively are less and less every day.
Right. Right.
And so with that in mind, it's important for people to register their trademarks with the United States Trademark Office.
Right.
Okay. For some of you that know, yes, there is such thing as a state trademark. You can register your trademarks with your state. Okay. Understand that is going to limit your rights and protection to that state.
Right. Right.
As an artist, that is unideal. Okay. Because unless you are exclusively a live performer and you refuse to perform anywhere but within your state, and you don't sell anything on the internet, unless that's who you are, you want, full national protection.
Right.
And after a certain point, international protection too, right?
Right.
So definitely first place you want to register your brand, your marks, is within your country, the country that you are domestic to, that you do your things from, right?
Right.
As your brand grows, as your operations grow, and as they expand into, new geographical markets, you're going to want to register in those countries too.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
If you're developing a brand, growing a business with other people, have a contract that clearly lays out who the owners are, who owns the brand, and what your individual rights are or are not in connection with that brand when you leave that business.
Gotcha.
And then police your brands.
Right.
It's not enough to use it. You have to police it.
Right.
Okay. Funny, just like I guess a fun fact. Let me see. What was it?
Yeah.
Aspirin. aspirin was a brand.
Okay. Right.
And everybody started calling their ibuprofen aspirin, and then that stopped being a brand. They lost their right to own that. It's called genericide. It means that your brand became so synonymous with the product, and you didn't stop it.
Right.
That it just became the word for it. All right. So two people that come to mind that have done a really good job of fighting this are going to be Kleenex and Google.
Oh, okay.
It's not uncommon for people to be like, yo, hand me a Kleenex, when they just mean a tissue, right? It's a tissue paper.
Right.
Kleenex has done a very good job of being like, we're Kleenex, we sell tissue paper, okay? Don't call your stuff Kleenex. And then Google, obviously, Google it, right? It's now become a verb. But Google doesn't let that happen.
Right.
Google doesn't want you to call searching Googling.
Right.
Because then they lose their brand in connection with search engines. Right?
Makes sense.
So they have to police it. They cannot allow other people not only to use the name, but to use the name in a way that makes it seem like that's just what the product is.
Right.
Okay? You have to police your brands.
Makes
and
sense.
then, let's see, to touch on registration of trademarks real quick, I guess, you're gonna do your search first before applying. You're going to apply. It's going to take anywhere from 8 to 12 or more months to get through the entire process.
Right.
Once you do get to the end of it, if you are granted a registration, do not think that is the end of it. Okay, you need to maintain your registration. Okay,
Gotcha.
That means obviously not only do you have to continue to use the mark, but you have to continue filing things with the USPTO. All right. At first, it's going to be 5 to 6 years after you register. Then every 9 to 10. There's a few little timelines there, but you need to be on top of that, because if you do not file those things on time, you can lose your registration.
Right.
You're going to have to go through the whole process again, and it just looks silly. And cost more money. So be sure to not only register your brands and your marks, but also
stay on top of
police them, stay on top of your registrations, and file all maintenance documents that you need to file to keep that registration alive.
Right. And get help if if this is.
Yeah, man. Look, I mean, it's funny. It goes without saying, but I literally tell people, obviously, if you can't afford something, you can't afford something.
Right.
You can't do it. If you can't pay for it, if you don't have the money, you can't. All right, fine.
Right.
But in the information age, bro, there's no reason why you can't at least learn about it.
Right. Exactly.
Learn. I mean, don't just go and do it.
Right.
Take some time to learn about it so you do it right. I mean, there are things like when it comes to selling and marketing, and there are just things that's look, just do it right.
Right.
It's like Gary Vee's whole motto, just don't overthink it, just do it.
Trial by error. Yeah.
Yeah, but when it comes to these things, there is trial by error costs money. It costs a lot of time, and we're not talking about content here. I'm not it's not the same thing. You could just put out content. You put out some bad content, whatever. It gets lost in the mix. And no, this is your trademarks are not going to get lost in the sauce, and people are not. It's not like they're going to be like, oh, whatever that. No. If you can't get it registered, if you aren't the only person using it, if you don't maintain your registration, if you don't police it, you're gonna lose it.
Exactly.
This is not the kind of thing that you should just do. You can do it yourself, but you can't just do it. You can't just do it, because I'll tell you, a lot of the times, it's more expensive to fix these things than it is to do them right from the beginning.
Right.
So definitely take your time, do these things right. People we know they're important.
Right.
Everybody loves to brag about their brand.
Exactly.
Rightfully so. Like, you built
should.
this thing, you should be proud of it.
Right.
But if you're so proud of it, you should give it the love and attention that it needs.
Right. Be intentional, but don't rush. Essentially, do it right.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to this, like, it's better to do it than not do it. But try to do it as right as you possibly can.
Right.
If you can't afford somebody to do it for you.
No, 100%. For sure. But yeah.
I think that kind of
Covers.
like the gist of trademarks.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, one thing, I guess like
To add in,
this is just like a cautionary tale. Mm-hmm. If you are an artist that wants to move to a large label, if like that's your dream,
right.
It is very important for you to secure the rights to your name before that deal goes down.
Gotcha.
Because it has happened before where artists lose the rights to their names because they signed it away to a label or something. I believe that's what happened to Prince, and which is why he had to become the artist formerly known as Prince. The label owned his name.
Right.
It happens. I've seen it happen at a smaller scale where the label in their contract is like, we own the name. You're not just giving them a license. They own it. So if they drop you or you drop them,
you don't have the name.
You need to come up with a new name.
Interesting.
So that's...
And I guess, do they take on liability of stuff after that too? Like if, say, maybe your name is infringing on something, they sign you, and maybe, is that still them signing you? Does that mean that they may be implicated in certain scenarios?
If they're the users and the owners of the mark, it is their liability.
Right. Okay.
Right? So, okay, yeah. I mean, that you found a interesting silver lining to losing your name.
Yeah.
But the reality is that they're probably still going to try to point at you.
Right, exactly.
Because you came to them with the name, and so they're going to be all like, oh, I mean, and beyond that, like the contract is going to say that all the rights that you give them do not infringe on other people.
Right.
So, yes, they're going to go after them first, but they're going to point at you and be like, look, you said that this was clear.
Right.
You said that this was fine, it wasn't infringing, and it is. Look.
Right.
So no, it's not. It's a silver lining, but it very quickly disappears.
Right. And the verbiage that they can put in there, I'm sure, is to protect their butts. So, yeah.
Of course.
Makes sense.
Of course.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, this has been an amazing chat, and I know that we definitely have more of these to do because these conversations could go on end. But again,
really
that's Roger Notario, attorney Roger Notario from Apollo's Counsel. Please go check him out. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. Essentially, a wealth of knowledge, as you can see, and very helpful. It's very down to earth. So no stupid questions. He'll be more than happy to at least guide you in the right direction if he can't help you himself. So
I'll always do my best.
Right.
You don't got a budget. I'll do my best. No promises.
Right.
But I'll at least try to point you in the right direction. Something. I'll tell you, if you can't afford a lawyer, at least call one. Right. You never know when you're going to catch them at a time where they have a few minutes and they'll give you an immediate consultation, or they have a program where they help people for free. You don't know.
Right.
So ask.